City of Stevens Point Special Finance Committee meeting, recorded October 25, 2021.
So, Chairperson Slawinski, you can call your meeting to order.
I'm going to call the meeting to order. Do we want to do a roll call?
Yes, so we'll call roll. Dalton and Johnson are both excused. So then we have Morrow.
Here.
And Shore.
Here.
And Slawinski.
Here.
So we have 3 present. That is a quorum.
Item number 2 is the review of the proposed 2022 operating budget, and I will pass it over to Corey for his delightful presentation.
Okay, well, thank you. So we'll get into the 2022 operating budget. First of all, we want to start with a big announcement, and this wasn't included in the PowerPoint that I sent out earlier because we weren't ready for the big reveal yet on this. So I will just, looks like the screen went, so just, okay, there we go. Okay, so we have to announce the winner for the annual photo contest that we have for getting on the front cover of the budget. So Mayor, if you want to advance the slides.
There is.
And I will say that every single year we are really amazed with the quality of photography that's submitted. Certainly there were a lot of great photos that, a lot of good ones as far as what could have been a great budget photo.
I like the composition of this.
So that is the winner. So, which actually, it's a really nice shot of the Cultural Commons, the two.
They call them the Freedom Eagles.
Yep, the 2 Freedom Eagles, and a really nice sunset in the background. So every year, actually, the Comptroller Treasurer's Office, we vote on what's the best picture to go on the budget cover. And, it's one person, one vote. So, and this is the picture that won that election. So.
Whose is it?
Always a neat activity. We have 23, we had 23 photos submitted. Okay, so now if we want to go on to the regular boring part of the budget presentation. What?
Alder Dalton has just joined us via Zoom.
Oh, great. Okay, so now we've got 4.
I think there was a question, Corey. Do you know whose photo this was? Who submitted
Oh,
the
yes. Thank you. Yeah, it was, her name is Kathleen. And Carrie, did we get a clarification on pronouncing the last name?
We did not.
Okay, it's Kathleen.
And it's C-E-L-E-R, so sealer or seller or however.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So as far as the budget highlights, as always, we budgeted for continuity of services. We assumed that the council wants to continue all the services and amenities that we currently have. So that was a goal of this budget, to maintain that. And a lot of times that can take up quite a bit of the available funds, just continuing what we currently do. Cost increases had some significant impacts. Some of those every year are non-discretionary, where there's no real way to avoid them. An example of that would be the recycling fee that we talked about, or that we'll talk about a little bit later. Others are based on critical need, and there were 2 really big ones. One is the seasonal wages that we talked about before at personnel, and the other is some needs in information technology. So those were 2 areas where basically the needs that came up were critical and needed to be addressed. So we needed to find other solutions. So we did the change in road construction funding, which we talked about 2 weeks ago at Finance, basically moving some road construction funding, the expense of that from the operating budget to the capital budget, and then also a reduction in workers' compensation premiums. That's a self-insured fund that we have, basically meaning we pay our own claims for workers' compensation, so we're able to set our own rates, and since that fund has been performing well, we're able to make an adjustment there. Okay, so next up, we've got the budget summary page. And of course, it'd be pretty hard to read it from here, so we'll just go on to the next slide on that. A couple of things to note on the budget summary page. Sometime the budget summary page tells you what happened. It doesn't always tell you why. So sometimes you'll have departments that go up and down more than others. just because of changes related to employee turnover, changes in health insurance enrollments, that can actually have a big impact. So sometimes you will see that, and every once in a while we'll get a question, okay, why did you cut funding for this department? And really it's just related to the costs of that department changing. Typically, there can be other reasons as well. Also note that today we're really just covering the general fund budget, which is the main account of the city. So the capital improvements number that you see on that budget summary page is just the portion that is being funded by the general fund. It doesn't include the portion that's being funded by borrowing. And then finally, note that for the total increase in the city tax levy, that doesn't always match the increase in the tax rate. And the reason is because you have the total tax levy, and then you also have the tax base as well that it's getting spread out over. And so with this budget, we're targeting an increase in the city tax rate of 3%. The number on the budget summary sheet shows a total increase in the levy of 4.35%. Without getting too technical, there were some issues between last year and this year related to TIF valuations and how much of our tax base was in a TIF district. So that put us in a position where basically it drove up the tax rate last year, and we had to kind of hold back on our debt service levy to offset that. And then now this year that's being corrected out. So that's why you have the difference between the 3% and the 4.35. So then if we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so I always like to cover the sources of funds that we have, and then also the uses of those funds. If
I'm
we
getting
can.
there, hang on. Oh,
Okay.
there we go. Well, the button wasn't working.
Oh, sure, okay.
And I had to use the mouse.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Nope, that's okay. So as far as the big sources, the biggest one is net new construction. We did have a good year for net new construction, and that number is 2.81%. And that would be based on what was built during calendar year 2020. So it's what would have been constructed last year, actually. And that produces $341,000. We also have the adjustment related to road maintenance, which was something that we hadn't planned to do, but that we made that adjustment to open up some more room in the budget this year based on the needs. That was $217,000. We also had the reduction in the workers' compensation rates, $58,000. We had an increase in electric utility aid for $52,000. Basically, this is a program that we don't talk about very much, but there are certain types of property that the state of Wisconsin has exempted from property taxation, and one of those is electric utility property for electric substations and things like that. We get an aid payment basically for that lost revenue for having that be tax exempt. So in those properties were revalued by the state, and that's what increased our electric utility aid. And then we also had an increase in transportation aid of $51,000. And that is primarily related to the fact that we are spending more money on roads than we have in the past. And it's actually a rolling 6-year average is how that's calculated. So as we have more of these higher years going in and some lower years going out, because we're spending a lot more now than we were 6 years ago, that's bringing that average up and bringing up the aid that we get for transportation. Any questions so far? No? Okay, great. So I have a couple of slides to cover some of what I just talked about in terms of the sources of funds. This is a summary of our net new construction percentages over the last 6 years. So you can look and see that the 2.81% is pretty good. Our highest year in recent memory was 2020 with 3.99. But so we've had higher years, but still the 2.81%, we're pretty happy with that. There are a lot of communities that would love to have a net new construction number like that. Move on to the next slide. I usually like to show you the major developments that really went into that number. You can see the biggest of which is Lineage Logistics. They did an expansion, and then you also have the Reserve, which is the student housing project on Division Street, the unit at Century World, and the Berkshire for other large projects that influence that number. And then if we go to the next slide, we have, I don't know, it might be a little bit hard to see from here, but you do have the percentages as far as how much each project contributed to that number. One of the things that you'll notice is that there's 3 projects there that cover about 2/3 of that number, which would be the unit Century World, the Reserve, and Lineage Logistics. And that's actually pretty typical that we have 1 to 2 to 3 very large commercial projects that really drive that number. You look at some of the others, like all other residential construction, other commercial construction, it really isn't a huge percentage, and typically it isn't. So it's really those large multi-million-dollar projects that typically drive our net new construction number. So move on to the next slide. So the adjustment for road maintenance budgeting, I know we talked about this at finance, but basically we're moving the $217,000 that's currently in the operating budget that goes to road construction. That's moved to the capital budget. Now, one of the things to note about that is then that also creates a need to backfill that funding through capital. So, and that is part of the tax rate planning that we've been working on as well, with the projection that some other taxing jurisdictions might come down. And it looks like, based on the most recent preliminary information that I have, it does look like there should be some offsetting decreases for the other taxing jurisdictions as far as affecting the tax rate. So that does give us the ability, I'm about 99% sure that it gives us the ability to backfill that in the capital budget and still stay within the 2.5% target that the council has set for the total tax rate for the coming 2021 tax year, 2022 payable taxes. Okay. And then, okay. And now we go on to the uses. So, and as usual, some of our biggest increases every year are related to personnel. So the biggest one is the overall pay plan adjustment of 2.3%. That was $169,000. And basically what that is to provide a cost of living adjustment to the whole pay plan and to increase the salary ranges for all of our positions. And then within that pay plan, you also have the ability to earn steps on top of that as you progress in your career with the city and you gain more seniority. So the salary steps are also an expense, but most years, some of that expense is offset by turnover. So we might have some people who go from step 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, but also you might have some open positions where somebody was at step 8 or 9 or 10, and now that position is starting back at step 2. So that almost offset all of that expense. Not quite. There's about $7,000 extra. And that just depends on turnover as far as how much of that is offset. We also had some pretty significant changes related to health insurance enrollment, just either employees changing from a single plan to a family plan because their life circumstances change, or somebody who didn't have our health insurance adding our health insurance. That was another $120,000. And then we also have the seasonal poll worker and crossing guard wages that we're going to be increasing. That was $112,000.
Corey, let's stop there, because I think it's important to note that one of the council's priorities has been making sure that people have livable wages. Put on top of that, the COVID employment environment that has been created, even with fast food industries, we were seeing that our seasonal employees, poll workers, crossing guards, were having difficulty recruiting. So in increasing those wages, we're doing it twofold. One, trying to get everybody up on a livable wage, even if it's a part-time or temporary basis. And two, aid in recruitment by paying a decent wage.
Yes, absolutely. And it's something that, it would be easy to skip it for a year because you're short of money. But you do that year after year after year, and you definitely will fall behind. And I definitely agree 100% with the mayor that, in this employment environment, we definitely have to try to stay as competitive as we can. Obviously, we have limited resources. We have state restrictions on what we can do with our budget, but we definitely have to do the best we can with compensation. So basically, you look at the top four there, which are all related to compensation and benefits in our employees. That's an impact of about $500,000. So certainly, and it's pretty typical that the bulk of our costs and the bulk of our cost increases from year to year are going to be related to personnel and the investment that we have in our employees. Also, another big impact was an increase in the IT budget, and we've got another slide on that where we can go through those changes there. Then we've also got increased recycling expenses. We've got increased election expenses, with 2022 being a year where there's 4 elections. There's a gubernatorial election. And then also we're a little bit down on the citation and municipal court revenue. And that is actually one of the revenue streams that was impacted by COVID. And during last year's budget, there were several. There was parking that was impacted, and there was also room tax that was impacted pretty considerably. We cut those other 2 revenue sources back as far as how much we were anticipating for them. We didn't cut back the citation or municipal court revenue. We thought that that would be a little bit more resilient than it has been. So. And we'll move on. So this is just a quick history of our pay plan adjustment in terms of the cost of living. And typically that is based on inflation, which is published by the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission. They do publish a standard number, and we do try to follow that as much as we can. Actually, in all of those 5 years, we either followed that number, or in 2019 and 2020, we actually added some additional funds to actually go above the rate of inflation as well. And then if we can, okay. And then we have seasonal poll worker and crossing guard wages. So I know at personnel, I mentioned, okay, we're not sure what number we're going to be able to get to yet. We wanted to get to at least $14 or maybe even $15, and the final number that we were able to come up with is $14.50. So basically, for all of our seasonal workers, $14.50 would be the lowest amount that we would be paying for 2022. I can tell you that this is a huge challenge. I think it has evolved a lot throughout this year, and just as an example, right now, we are advertising for seasonal positions related to winter recreation and the Iverson Winter Recreation Area. And we'd like to fill 14 spots there. So far, we have 2 applicants. So this is something that we see as a real critical need that, basically, either we put some resources into addressing this, or the very real possibility that, are we able to get the toboggan run open? Are we able to have a sledding hill open? Next summer, are we able to find enough lifeguards and enough employees to get the city pool open? So we do know that a lot of other employers are raising their internal minimum wage to $15. That definitely $11.66 is not going to cut it for 2022. That's at least certainly the way that we're seeing it, and I think that there's a lot of evidence that we're not going to be okay at $11 an hour for 2022. So we're trying to do the best we can and trying to stay competitive with those changes. So, and then the IT budget increase, couple of things going on here. One is the need for more cybersecurity. That definitely is also a rapidly changing area in terms of the threats that are out there. So we are proposing to add $20,000 to the IT budget for a program called Rocket Cyber, and basically that is a service that would be used to monitor our network, monitor network activity, and basically respond to or prevent hacking attacks. So it would be a contracted service with security experts who can keep an eye on your network all the time, watch what's happening, and hopefully prevent something bad, happening to the city and to our network. I do know that if we get hit with ransomware, the organizations that's happened to, that can be really devastating when you lose all of your data. I was at a conference last year and heard from a finance director who had been through a ransomware attack, and he said, one of the first and most critical things that you need to figure out is you need to get a payroll out. You need to pay your employees. And he said, and your first challenge that you're going to have is you've lost all your data. You don't even know who your employees are. And when he said that, it's like, wow, yeah, but I suppose that's true, that you don't really think about how much we rely on our data. So certainly anything we can do to prevent that is important. Now, that being said, it can't be a blank check either. I will tell you that the IT department originally proposed a service for about $43,000 a year. And, that was something that was considered. We looked at that, but at the same time, we tried to find a more cost-effective solution and a vendor that could offer a better price than that. So that number that you see actually is a more competitive price for a different option that is not the first option that was looked at. The other really big impact that we have related to IT are software expenses, and there's a trend in the software industry to, rather than selling you a software package outright and saying, okay, here it is, you own this, you can use it for as long as you have your computer, changing from that type of a purchased kind of format to annual subscriptions, where now you're paying every year or you're paying every month for that software. And there were two big ones where when we replaced computers last year, the change was made from purchasing the software outright to having software subscriptions, and those are Microsoft Office 365 for about $41,000, and then also Adobe, that's the software that's used to edit PDFs, that is $15,000 a year. And actually with Adobe, they no longer allow you to buy the software outright. They've basically pushed everyone to the subscription-based model. And one thing that I want to note on that as well is we've been working with IT to say, okay, I mean, is there anything that we can do? These operating budget impacts are pretty significant. And, they have looked into other programs that would be available that would be more cost-effective. But of course, that's also a major change, citywide, and that's something that we would want to talk with all of our departments about. If we're going to say, okay, you no longer get to use this software, you have to use this software now, certainly we would want input from the users who are actually using the software. So that's something that we're still working through internally as far as other options to bring some of these expenses down. And then there were also increased costs related to IT contracted services in terms of just what comes up throughout the year, which is another $12,000. So all told, with all four items that I mentioned there, you're looking at an impact of $88,000 to the 2022 operating budget. So, okay, and then we also have increased recycling expenses. Up until now, basically, we've been able to collect recyclables with our trucks and take that to the county materials recovery facility and drop it off for free. They have not in the past charged us anything for that service, and they've been able to basically rely on grants and also the sale of the materials to support that. However, there was a change in vendors where basically their contract expired. They needed to find a new vendor with a new price to take it over, and that price is higher. That vendor is going to take some time to get established. So they're implementing a new fee of $2.09 per capita for every municipality that participates in the program. For the city of Stevens Point, that's a little bit over $53,000 a year. Now, we are hoping that after about 2 years, as that vendor gets established, that the costs can come down, and we're hoping that those recycling expenses will go down in the future. However, that is where that's at right now. And I should also note that currently we do pay about $300,000 annually to dispose of the garbage that's collected. So I know actually when the news broke about this and that the city was going to have to pay this new $53,000 a year, I did get an email from somebody saying, hey, can't we just throw it all in the landfill instead? Wouldn't that be cheaper? And the answer is no, it actually wouldn't, because that would increase our tonnage and would probably be more expensive for sure to send our recyclables to the landfill. Okay, so that covers, the main things that are going on for 2022. I also wanted to include some information on how things look for 2023 and 2024. And of course, this is a preliminary look, but I think it's always good to be kind of looking toward the future and what could be coming. And, so far, we are projecting continued strength in new construction, and that would be based on whatever is constructed for calendar year 2021. That will impact the 2023 budget and the net new construction number for the 2023 budget. A couple of big projects that we have going on right now for calendar year 2021. Of course, we've got Northside Yard downtown, which is coming along really well. And we've also got Delta Dental. So, and it helps, kind of like I said before, having some of those really large projects really does help push that number up. We've also are projecting a decrease in revenue due to interest income, and that's a lingering effect of COVID. And basically, we have a 5-year deposit ladder. Is really the heart of our investment portfolio, so which helped us immensely when COVID hit, because our interest rates didn't go down right away. So when interest rates more or less crashed, we didn't have a big financial hit right away, but what we have is basically 1/5 of our portfolio maturing every year and then resetting to those lower rates. So rather than getting hit with, several $100,000 worth of impact all at once, we're getting more of a delayed impact, which is a little bit easier to absorb because it's over time. And then now a positive for 2023 is, of course, we'll have a decrease in election expenses because it'll just be primarily the February and April local elections. And then, of course, that always goes down in odd years, goes back up in even years. And then at this point, I am projecting an increase in health insurance premiums, a modest increase somewhere in the range of 2 to 5%. Basically, we did actually reduce our health insurance premiums for 2021. We're keeping them the same for 2022, and then probably need to make an inflationary increase for 2023. So, and one thing to note on our health insurance is that's also in a self-insured fund. So basically, we pay our own claims, we set our own premiums, we set our own premiums to, basically to make sure that we have enough money in there to pay our claims. So we do have some control over it, but of course, we want to make sure that we've got enough in there to pay our bills and our obligations. And some ongoing challenges. I certainly see inflation and increasing costs to be a continuing challenge. And then also for wage adjustments, like I said, we typically try to target the rate of inflation for our wage adjustments. I'll be real honest, if inflation continues to go the way that it is, it might be difficult in terms of, how far we can follow that number up and work it into the operating budget. I think it's important that we do the best we can, try to follow inflation as much as possible, but if we see inflation numbers that we haven't seen in the past, which is already starting, that is going to be sort of a new challenge, and there might be the need for those wage increases, but not necessarily the ability to do that. So, Alder Shore.
Thank you, Comptroller Treasurer. So when you're concerned about inflation, you just referenced history. I'm sure you meant the 1970s and 60s. Is your concern inflation, closer to 3% than 2%, or going back to the bad old days, which I know there's a lot of talk about it, but there's also been a lot of experience gained with with the currency board managing inflation. So how are you viewing that threat?
The way that I'm viewing it is I hope that the Federal Reserve will sort of step up its game to contain inflation. I think that right now they have not done an adequate job of that, to be quite frank. I know that they've kind of assumed that inflation would be transitory and that this was just sort of a hiccup with reopening and COVID and supply chains coming back to normal. And I think that there is more inflationary pressure in the economy than what they've been willing to admit, and that people are out there, spending money, and that is partially driving up, the cost of goods and services. So I do see that as a threat, and I see it definitely not just maybe it's, rather than being around 2, maybe it's around 2.8. I do see it a threat being more in the 4 or 5% ranges. We'll see. It's anybody's guess what happens with inflation, but I will admit that I definitely am concerned about it.
Thank you.
Okay. And then going on, so the 2024 budget, now for looking at net new construction for 2024, this would be whatever is constructed and actually completed between January 1st of 2022 and December 31st of 2022. So we're not even in the year yet where that would have that impact on net new construction. But we can look at the pipeline and we can look at sort of the timing of the projects that we have coming. And there is some concern that there may be a gap in the pipeline of new projects and that you could have a lower net new construction number for 2024. To be, quite candid, so with net new construction, like I said, it's what year was the work actually completed. So even if you start a project and it breaks ground in, say, July or August, well, by the time they do all of the work with putting in the foundation and, all the dirt work and everything, oftentimes what you'll have is that first year, you don't really see a whole lot of value, and your value is really in the next year, because a lot of times, especially with a larger project, if it doesn't start until mid-year, you just don't quite get that much done by January 1st. So that's kind of what we're looking at as far as where the gap could come in is, even though we have projects in the pipeline, it's okay, what year does the value increase hit, and what year do you have that impacting your net new construction number? So at least preliminarily, looks like we might have a bit of an issue there. We're also seeing it with commercial building permits right now that, okay, there might be a bit of a gap in the pipeline. And then also for 2024, so we have another decrease in interest revenue. Right now that's projected at $65,000. Part of that is because interest rates were very high in 2018. So when you have your best deposits that are going to mature and get reset to that lower interest rates, that obviously is going to have a larger impact, since those are some of the best deposits that we have, making about 3.25%, and you're not going to find that anywhere right now. Also, because it's an even year, we'll have an increase in expenses related to elections. That'll be a presidential election year, and we're hoping with all those challenges that recycling expenses could actually decrease. We will see, but we're hoping that as the vendor gets more established, that could happen, and that would obviously be something that I think, at least right now, we're definitely going to need in 2024. So looking at tax rates, and of course this is still up in the air, because once we get the final information from the other taxing jurisdictions as far as which way their tax rates are going, then we will sort of build our tax rate into that. So these numbers likely will change, but right now the tax rate that we're proposing is an assessed tax rate of $10.46 per thousand, and on an equalized basis, so on a fair market value basis, that'd be $8.87. And you might say, well, why the difference? The difference is between assessed value and fair market value. And why does one go up and the other go down? The reason why that equalized rate goes down a little bit is just because of the increases in fair market value of properties in the city. So when you look at it on the basis of fair market value, the fair market value of the city has been increasing by more than 3%. So you'll notice that when you look at the trend of tax rates for the equalized or fair market value tax rates, that it is decreasing over the last 4 years. And then finally, proposed levy, and again, this is likely going to change, but right now we're looking at a levy of $18,001,039 with an assessed tax rate of $10.46 per thousand. So, and that actually concludes all of the slides. So with that, I'll take any questions, concerns, comments. So I know that we all have to be here until 7 o'clock anyway for the council meeting, so.
Is there any questions from committee, Alder Shore or Alder Morrow? Anyone from the audience or on Zoom?
I have a,
Okay, go ahead.
basically a comment. Looking at the residential construction percentage, I think it was 11%, Corey. I'm surprised my master bath reno didn't kick that up at least into 20 or 30% for what it seemed to cost me. I'm a little disappointed there.
Well, maybe we'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I think the assessor's free tomorrow morning. Are you available?
I think Director Karnowski's already made the appointment for me for the assessor to come over.
We have a chat comment. Says, this is from Alder Dalton. Says, I don't have any questions at this time. I'm going to stop sharing.
So I guess if there's no further questions, I guess we all have the, go ahead.
So this was just the initial presentation. The public has the opportunity to view not only the slide presentation, but the proposed budget. That should be available online tomorrow if it's not already today. If anyone has questions from the public regarding the budget, they can contact the Comptroller Treasurer's office, my office, or their alderperson. Of course, we'll all just go to Corey anyway. So it might be easier just going right to the Comptroller Treasurer's office. And we will be looking at final budget approval for operational in November, so we can get the Christmas cards out in the form of a tax bill in December.
All good?
That's all I had.
All right, I guess if no other further questions, we will adjourn at, what we got for a time there?
6:47.
6:47. Oh,
Thank you.
thanks.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.